Today we're talking about filters. In the first two episodes, we did a general overview of subtractive synthesis and then went over the oscillator. Now we're moving on to the next stage in the signal chain, the filter. The oscillator generates a complex initial timbre. The filter modifies this timbre by removing certain overtones, or by emphasizing them. Let's take a look at a few different filters and hear what this sounds like. The most commonly used filter in subtractive is a low pass. Low pass filters remove high frequency content. On its own, without resonance, low pass filtering results in a darker sound. High pass filters remove low frequency content. On their own, without resonance, high pass filters produce a brighter sound. Band pass filters are a combination of high pass and low pass. They remove the high end and the low end, leaving a band of frequencies in the middle. Notch filters are essentially inverted bandpass filters, which is why you'll occasionally hear them referred to as band stop or band reject filters. These filters leave the high end and low end intact. Instead, they remove a narrow band of frequencies in the middle of the range. Now, before we move on to resonance, we need to cover some vocab. An increase in the amplitude of a signal is known as amplification. The inverse, a reduction in amplitude, is known as attenuation. The strength of attenuation in a filter is known as a filter's slope, and it's measured in decibels per octave. Decibels is a measure of the intensity of a sound. It's a logarithmic scale and a highly confusing one at that. A doubling of the sound intensity is achieved with an increase of 3 decibels. However, that doesn't translate directly to perceived loudness. To double the loudness of a sound, we need an increase of 10 decibels. Likewise, a 50% reduction in loudness would be subtracting 10 decibels. To bring this back to filter slopes, decibels per octave refers to the amount of attenuation in decibels for each octave beyond the cutoff frequency, the cutoff frequency being the frequency at which attenuation begins. To illustrate, if we took a 12 decibel per octave filter and set the cutoff frequency at 100 Hz, at 200 Hz we could expect attenuation of 12 decibels. This means that we've cut the volume by a little more than half. At 300 Hz we'll see 24 decibels of attenuation, and so on. Now that we know the terminology, let's hear it in context. Filter slopes are usually in multiples of 6 decibels per octave. A 6 decibel per octave filter is known as a one-pole filter, and for every multiple of 6 we add a pole. The most common filter slopes are 12 and 24 decibels per octave, known as 2-pole or 4-pole. I'm keeping the cutoff frequency the same and changing only the filter slope. Notice that as the decibels per octave gets higher, the sound gets noticeably darker. Up until now we've only talked about attenuation, but filters can also amplify or emphasize frequency ranges. They do this through resonance. Resonance amplifies the frequency ranges in the immediate vicinity of the cutoff. Let's hear what that sounds like. You can see the movement of the cutoff as a sort of rising wave of frequencies. If you push the resonance to extremes, you can create self-oscillation. With self-oscillation, the filter amplifies the cutoff frequency so much that it begins to output a sine wave at that frequency, even if there's no corresponding frequency in the input. Referring back to episode 1, this technique turns a filter into a generator instead of a modifier. It generates a signal with a frequency, amplitude, and timbre. In fact, if you set the filter cutoff to track the keyboard, you can even use this as an oscillator. And with that, you have 2/3 of your signal chain. Next week, we'll complete the chain with a discussion of amplifiers, and even start exploring some envelopes and other controllers. If you like this episode, support me on Patreon for bonus mini episodes. This week, we're using comb filters and notch filters to create our own phasers, choruses, and flangers. As always, I'm thatbeet, and this has been Synth Fundamentals. Thanks for watching.